Welcome back to Out of Spec, and this is the 2022 Nissan Pathfinder driving impressions. Be sure to check out our other video on a very detailed walk around for the exterior and interior pieces of this car, but this is focused exclusively on the driving impressions. This was embargoed as of this morning, so if you're tuning in on June 9th, you are first in line to hear about it. Now, a quick disclaimer, this is again a pre-production prototype, so there are things that can change, but I have a feeling this is probably pretty close to the final review model. We're going to take it for a nice little drive. First of all, this is the key. It is a very standard Nissan key, albeit with the new logo at the top there. Very small key for such a large vehicle. That was the first thing I noticed. But just wanted to point that out really quick, and let's get it fired up. Hear that V6 roar. It's actually pretty subtle, which is kind of nice, honestly. Now you have 7 driving modes, which is almost overwhelming, but I can argue there's probably only a few you'd actually use. So I'm out here in this beautiful wilderness just north of Nederland. It's actually a previous burn area from a wildfire out here in Colorado, but it is very beautiful panoramic views of Long's Peak and other mountains over here. So we are going to start it off in off-road mode because I am actually on a trail. And you have a couple different off-road modes technically. There's mud and rut, there's sand, there's snow. I'm gonna choose mud and rut for this. So, fire it into reverse. You have this awesome camera set up here, 360 camera, as well as either front or rear, depending on which direction you're going. That makes it really great, both for off-roading and on trails, as well as just in the city, parking, you know, tight places. This shifter, I'm a huge fan. It's not too bulky and in the way. But let's just take this on this little trail here. So there is an all-new suspension on this Pathfinder. Not super state-of-the-art. I mean, they just basically tweaked it a bit more. It makes the front, I think, 28% more stable, and then the rear is 14%. And there's also 50% more high-strength steel in this car. So it doesn't flex quite as much, and it actually works quite well off-road. You won't have quite as much suspension travel as other more capable off-roaders, so I'd probably correctly call this a soft roader. Should be fine with most trails, but you might also want some more beefed up off-road tires. These all seasons will do fine, but they're definitely built for city driving, probably getting better fuel economy, but it's a fine tire for this, something like this light trail here. The map has no idea where I am, so that's fun. I have in front of me on this 12.3-inch driver's gauge cluster which percent of which wheels are getting the 4x4. So that's pretty cool while you are off-roading. In off-road mode, you can kind of keep track of which front or rear biased it is for the 4x4 system. And that's pretty neat. Sometimes I watch that with snow and ice in my own car. It's not really that useful, I'd say, for the driver, but it is interesting. There definitely is some body roll, but that's kind of to be expected, and you don't want it to be too stiff. If they had just set this up for a track, first of all, no one would be using it for what it was set up for, but also it would not be comfortable at all on a trail like this. So we are exiting the trail and getting onto a paved road. Let's see how it goes. So the steering was super kind of lenient and airy, so I'm going to put it back to standard mode here. Putting it into standard mode on this paved road kind of tightened up the steering a little bit, not much, but it gave you more power right off the gate. Basically, those off-road modes can help tether back the power and, you know, lets you focus more on driving very slowly and carefully and precise. Now take this with a big grain of salt because I am up here above 8,500 feet, probably almost 9,000 at this point. And this car is not very fast, does not have a lot to give, but it's not giving up either. You know, it is a V6 with almost 300 horsepower, but that at this altitude, without any sort of forced induction, is being challenged and probably put to its limit, honestly. I imagine in sea level this would feel much more capable, just in general. And we got a tight turn here. You know, still some body roll, but it's actually much more planted than most SUVs I've driven in the past. It's definitely pretty fun kind of shifting this 9-speed automatic, you know, putting it in the gear you want. Paddle shifters are not something I would have expected on a car like this with low power and 9 speeds in the automatic, but it is a cool feature and it helps you just kind of put it in the gear that you think maybe suits the situation better than the computer thinks. That being said, it's really not the type of car I would have expected to have paddles. It's not overly powerful given its size and weight, and the 9-speed transmission is a lot of paddle shifting to get through it all. But that's really not a big deal. It still works just fine, and I'd rather have paddles than no paddles. Definitely not complaining on that front. So we're about to hit Boulder Canyon. I'm gonna actually put it over here in sport mode and see how it goes. So I'm heading downhill now, so that definitely helps, and that can let me focus more on the handling. But even from a standstill on flat ground, the first couple of gears really are quite torquey. I feel like that's where the bulk of the torque band is. Kind of launching you almost in first gear. Of course, that lasts a very small amount of time before it shifts into second, because each gear is somewhat short. But it's pretty fun in really slow speeds. Something that is more harshly affected by the lack of power or lack of forced induction is passing speed, especially uphill. Again, I don't know what it's like at sea level, but up here in Colorado, it's definitely a bit of a struggle. Sport mode also drastically tightens the steering. It makes it, you know, kind of fun and engaging. It is an electronic steering rack, and yeah, just kind of waddles wherever you want it to go. When you rev it out, it's really kind of fun. The revs kind of soar over the actual sound isolation in the cabin, and that makes it, you know, pretty engaging. Something I have noticed in the canyons is the lane departure warning. It's such a big, wide car compared to like a sedan or even a sports car that when you're up in the canyons, if you're not perfectly following the lines, it'll constantly shake the steering wheel and let you know, hey, you're crossing that white line a little bit, which is good. You know, it's safe, but it's definitely something to keep in mind. Focus entirely on the road, only let your passengers see the sights. This really is overall a great SUV to explore Colorado in. I mean, first of all, this obsidian green pearl color. It's dark, it's deep, it looks really good with the evergreen trees out here. You have lots of good visibility. The panoramic moonroof helps, especially in these canyons where you can actually look above the car line and see the rock faces or the trees. It's a very comfortable cabin. I like it with this brown color too on the inside. It's very open feeling. You have kind of the tan up above here and then the brown leather like everywhere. Really good choices of materials, except for all of the piano black on this infotainment. I mean, almost every button is piano black, which looks good. I will give them that. Photographs nicely, but only when it's clean, which is rare. There's a lot of dust and fingerprints that builds up on this piano black. But I like all the buttons. I don't usually say that either, but there are some very useful buttons, like changing the display from daytime into night mode with the press of a button. Or there's also the camera, which only works at low speeds under like 5 or 10 miles an hour. Of course, it jumped to your map, which I'm using right now, and it's pretty fantastic. You have your heated and ventilated seats on the Platinum trim. The ventilated seats are pretty noisy, just FYI, especially for the passengers right behind you. That fan really just kind of kicks noise into the back, but they are comfortable, so they can deal with it. good climate control. The steering wheel is very comfortable. This is a very smooth leather, as they call it. Only comes in the Platinum trim, but it's very, very, I don't know, elegant and luxurious feeling. Just a lot of good touches on here. The places where your arms sit are pretty comfortable. It's just a very comfortable place to be. You have full power adjustment on the driver's seat. Lumbar is in and out. It's not really a 3D lumbar support. And unfortunately, the passenger doesn't have lumbar. But as a driver, and even as a passenger in the stock seat configuration, it's very nice. And you can see behind me here, this is the captain's chair trim. So you have options of 2 bench seats in the back, which will seat up to 8 people total, or in this case, 7 people because of the 2 captain's chairs. And those are very comfortable as well. So in a minute, I'll be taking you into the city to really do kind of a city driving experience. And we'll use the ProPilot Assist and just see how it does at city speeds. But really quick, I want to try to throw on the ProPilot Assist right now here in the mountains and see how it does. So it's now locked onto the car in front of me and automatically braking. And you'll hear that beeping noise every time the lanes show up versus when it thinks it can't really keep track of them. So right now it is steering itself in the lane, even though there's a bit of a curve, and it's also tracking the car in front of you. So that's nice. But it is, yeah, it's getting kind of close to that center lane. Kind of surprising here. And obvious disclaimer, it's not like a full self-driving system, so you can't really expect it to take you literally anywhere by itself. But it is a very nice, well-equipped cruise control system with lane keep assist, the front-end collision, and it'll throw that steering wheel warning if you're not giving enough input into the steering wheel, and that'll come up on the driver's cluster as well as the heads-up display as a giant warning. It actually freaked me out the first couple times. But yeah, that's driving in the canyons on sport mode. A little bit of body roll, that's fairly expected, but definitely more planted than some older SUVs used to be. It's not really sport driven, it's not sport focused. You don't have the power to really handle sporty driving or aggressive driving, but it is capable, and that I think is one of the more important things. All right, we are leaving Boulder Canyon and entering the town of Boulder. So let's do some city driving and just see how this vehicle handles. It is big, but I don't plan on parallel parking, so it shouldn't be a problem. I'm going to start by enabling ProPilot Assist and setting it at right about the speed limit here. And it currently doesn't detect the lanes, but it is following the car in front of me. And when following a car, you have 3 different levels of distance, basically close, medium, or far. I tend to use the medium format, and it seems to work just fine. But he is approaching a stoplight, so let's see how I do. There we go. That beep means the lane's just kicked in. And it's slowing down, appropriately, but a little bit aggressively. And that's something interesting about this car is, though it lacks a little bit in power, it makes up for that in braking. It has tremendous braking capability as far as I can tell, and that is arguably more important than power. It's how fast can you stop a 4,500 pound vehicle. So right now it's got the lane keep assist on, and it is working properly. Oh, there goes the lanes. It really is intermittent with knowing, when there are lanes and when there aren't. But again, this is pre-production prototype software technically, so that could still be improved. But it is a very capable, cruise control. So the car in front of me kind of veered off to the left, and it immediately found the car in front of that. So that was pretty seamless. Didn't really try to accelerate suddenly or freak out. With the cruise control, it'll do auto hold up to 3 seconds when you're in a city, like stop and go traffic in a city. But what's interesting is the ProPilot Assist with Navi Link, using the navigation system to know exactly where you are on your route, will actually stop for 30 seconds and then continue by itself up to 30 seconds. And that's only on registered freeways. Now that didn't actually work when I tested it on Highway 270 the other day, but that could have been because it doesn't register that small section as a freeway, or I wasn't using the built-in navigation, or they may still be working on the implementation of that component in the software. But it's a pretty cool piece if it works, but it's really not a big deal to just hit the resume button and continue as you would normally. I would say that uphill in the canyons is where the lack of power is most noticeable. In most cities, I'd say it's probably not a big deal, especially when you're only in the first couple of gears from low speeds. It's plenty powerful, plenty capable, has plenty of low-end torque to get you going, and that's really what kind of matters. So right here, I'm gonna let this van go and then gun it, and yeah, I'm already caught up to him. So it's really not too underpowered as far as city driving, and on the highway, that's not a big deal either. It's really just passing speed, but we'll get to that in just a moment here. So city driving is fine. The transmission really stays out of your way. It shifts when it thinks it needs to, and I really haven't found a need to offset that with the paddles. Every once in a while back in the canyons, I would adjust the shifting that I chose, but in the city, it just kind of does its job. I love the auto hold. The ProPilot Assist Cruise works fine in the city, even at low speeds. So, great city car. We are now embarking onto the highway section of our drive. So let's see how it does kind of at highway speeds with highway traffic. We'll use the cruise control and kind of go up and down hills, do some passing, stuff like that. We'll also see kind of how it would be on a road trip. How comfortable and quiet is it? And so far, so good. So I have ProPilot Assist on right now, and it's got the lanes matching great, and it definitely knows where the lanes are much better than it did back in the canyons. It's also tracking the car in front of me and adjusting as needed, because that car is kind of weaving in and out a bit. For an SUV, I'd say it is pretty quiet. Nissan actually did improve some of the sound deadening, including thickening some of the glass and adding acoustic dampening materials, and that has helped, and it's a nice place to be. My cruise control is working great, and we are going up a hill now, so I'll kind of see how it downshifts. We're at just under 2,000 RPM. All right, shifted up to something. The gears are so tight, 9 different speeds, that it's hard to tell sometimes whether it's actually downshifting. So it's downshifted a couple times here, and we're trying to maintain that speed. So it's doing the trick. It just downshifts to accommodate for, A, the altitude, but also the speed and the steepness of the hill. The screen in front of me as the driver is really cool. It's a 12.3 inch upgraded, fully digital screen. By default, you get the 2 standard real gauges with a 7-inch screen in between them, which is still good, still very useful, but this full digital one is pretty awesome. And it has really interesting take on the speedometer on the right side and the tachometer on the left side. The speedometer on the right side doesn't actually have markings at each tick mark. It just has a digital speedometer next to this dial thing. So that's kind of interesting. And then the tachometer does have actual markings, and it shows that it redlines at 6,500 RPM, which is pretty high. Also in front of me is a 10.8 inch heads-up display. Really good, very clear and bright. It doesn't look quite as good at night because the black background is actually not true deep black. It's not like an OLED screen. So there's a little bit of light leak around it, but it works fine. It looks good, and it's actually convenient. I have these same features on my infotainment system in front of me, but if I look further up in the windscreen, I can see the speed limit sign, my speed, as well as what the cruise control is set at, whether or not it sees the actual lanes, and whether or not it sees the car in front of me. So very, very good. Right now we're getting into a little bit of traffic, and it's slowing down nicely. Again, these brakes are very capable and very strong, and my only complaint is sometimes it applies them too strongly. I would expect a bit more of a linear braking, especially since I can see through the screen that it sees the car in front of me. So the ProPilot Assist has the lane keep assist, which is great. But if you don't fidget with the steering wheel enough, it'll throw that huge warning on both the infotainment screen in front of you as well as a heads-up display. And if you don't fidget with it at that point, it will then, you know, start making loud noises at you, and finally will bring the car to a complete stop in your lane. You don't want that to happen, so don't fall asleep at the wheel. All right, I just turned around. We're gonna go back on the highway. And we're doing an uphill merging ramp. So I'm flooring it, and we're just barely doing mid-50s. 60, 65, 70. It did eventually get speed, just not quick. Fortunately, that was a long on-ramp, but I'd say uphill is definitely the challenge for this car. So I just got over in front of this pickup truck, and now I'm going to try to pass him. It's slow, but it happens. So, not a total powerhouse, but it's capable. It's doing everything I'm asking for it in all these situations. Just not always as fast as you might hope, but I'm fine with that. I'm in a nice big SUV, and I'm happy with myself. Alright, now we'll do some heavy braking. Yeah, so these brakes are definitely what kind of makes up for the lack of power. So overall, it's a good vehicle to drive. I felt just fine on that trail. You know, it wasn't a very dramatic trail, but I'd say it's good enough for what most people are doing. Basically off-road or gravel road with a lot of ruts and rocks and uneven terrain. It seemed to balance just fine and drove really well in off-road mode. Of course, in the canyons, it seemed to handle well, especially downhill. Uphill in the canyons is where you start noticing the lack of power. And then here on the highway, it was kind of the same situation. It's a nice place to be, it's quiet, it's very comfortable. I could definitely take this on a long road trip. You have 18.5 gallon tank, so plenty of fuel, although probably only mid to upper 20s on the highway for fuel economy. So yeah, that's kind of the driving impressions. My final thoughts are, it could use a bit more power, but it really is good. The transmission is not a weak point. I'm so glad it's not a CVT anymore. Seems like a really good, capable 9-speed automatic. I think there's enough space under the hood for a turbo. Maybe they'll make a Nismo version someday. But it looks pretty good, drives good. It's a solid car, solid SUV. And priced as tested is just about $50,000. Just under 50 with the MSRP for the Platinum, I mean fully decked out Nissan Pathfinder. I am thoroughly impressed with that. You know, I have some qualms with the car. I wish it had more power, but at that price point, that's really respectable. You get a full, comfortable, luxurious feeling 3-row SUV for under 50 grand. But that's really it for my driving impressions. It drives nicely, the transmission's good, little lack of power every once in a while, but I'm sure at sea level it's even better than up here at a mile high. So let us know what you think. What do you think of the car itself, the color, this obsidian green pearl, the tan interior? And definitely check out our other video where I take you on a full detailed tour of the specs and the details of the car. For the exterior and the interior, I take you through all 3 rows. It's a fun time. So we'll see you guys in another video very soon. Until then.